sound off, please.
Pleasure and pain, life and death, and all other pairs of opposites. We recognize that one as the only witness to the changing phenomena of this universe. May we, through that grace, go beyond darkness and delusion and realize the truth in this very life. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Dhanur Grihitva Upanishadam Mahastram Sharam Hupasanashita Sanjayita Ayamya Tad Bhavakatena Chetasa Laksham Tarivaksharam Somya Vidhi. Taking as weapon that mighty bow furnished by the Upanishads and other non-dual teachings, scriptures, fasten to it the arrow of mind, made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone. Then drawing full strength, O student, release and penetrate the mark, that imperishable Brahman. Om Sahana Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karva Vahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvisho Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Welcome everyone this day to the SRV ashram in Honoka'a, Hawaii. We are here some 2,500 or 3,000 miles from any other land mass except our own little chain of islands, and therefore surrounded by our own Ganges, our own holy water, the Ganga Pacifica, if you want to call it that. And therefore a very sanctified atmosphere in which to dive in and study the Vedanta. This is ancient, maybe better said, timeless system of living. It's very hard to call it a philosophy or a religion because it promises to make a Christian a better Christian, a Hindu a better Hindu, a Jew a better Jew, because of its universal nature. And so because of that universal nature, we've been studying a course of classes over the last 4 or 5 weeks on Advaita Vedanta, that is, non-duality. Non-duality is gaining ground now, rather popular in this day and age, but not popular in the sense that it's very widespread yet. Basically, we have this 3 levels of philosophy that we look into, basically: non-duality, qualified non-dualism, and dualism. Basically, if you want to borrow Christian terms, duality is pray to your Father in heaven. Because mankind is still thinking in terms of God and mankind being 2 different things, or 2 separate things, like creature and creator, or nature and spirit. But Maya matramidam dvaita dvaita paramattaha. Those who are thinking in terms of duality or two-ness are still uninformed about the nature of reality, which is always one, indivisible, homogeneous mass of pure conscious awareness. There are many words in Sanskrit for it, like chitgana, a mass of consciousness. Indivisible, without borders, boundless, ever free, never bound. Brahman, Atman, Chaitanya, described by such names as Samadhi, Nirvana, Kaivalya, found out by such great seers as avatars, saints, Jivan Muktas, Videha Muktas, Avadhutas, and other great beings, through time out of mind. So if you were to say, pray to your Father in heaven, you're thinking in terms of duality. But if you're thinking in terms of a qualified non-dualism, then you would say, I'm the branch and he's the vine. Or if Christ were to say to you, I'm the vine and you're the branches to all people, then those people who are thinking in terms of having a connection with divine reality through the Savior, through the avatar, through the chosen ideal, we call it Ishvara or Ishtam in India, then you're talking about qualified non-dualism. That is, there's a deeper connection. And if you talk about in terms of Advaita, which we were just giving these series of classes on, non-dualism we call it, then you would say, I and my Father are one. As you see no difference between God and mankind. Mankind is just God walking around on 2 legs, is how Vivekananda said it when he was among us in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So these classes on non-duality have taken us in many interesting directions over the last 4 or 5, 6 weeks. And we end our series of Advaita Vedanta classes in Hawaii today by completing a look at this chart, which we've been seeing here on your right, on my left, called the Gyanamatra, or the particle of intelligence, because we're all basically thinking in terms of particles in these ages. Basically, we think in terms of the physical particle, atomic particles. But if we were to go to the kingdom of heaven within us, then we would begin to see where our ancestors live and where they have gone, where they've come from, and also where the celestials or the angels, the angelic beings are, and where the gods and goddesses, whom so many beings are talking about and worshipping in this day and age amongst the various religions of the world. And we'd also be thinking in terms of great beings like saints and sages, and where they keep their subtle bodies, where they go after death and how they return. And also what many religions describe as a trinity, in our case Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, the gods of projection, sustenance and withdrawal, or sometimes called creation, preservation, and destruction. All of these 5 levels, which I've just talked about, are actually different levels of particle. And that's where, if we leave off our death grasp on the atomic particle and we begin to follow our intuition, we begin to practice meditation, cut time down, and take space out of the equation, that is outer space. When we begin to see the kingdoms of heaven within us, it's just a matter of time before we can connect to them, sort of like connecting dots inside, or following a trail of breadcrumbs that's been left. You have to proceed slowly at first, but eventually you get the idea, and you begin to have subtle memory of lives that you've lived in the past. That's what this is called. Smriti Bedu, subtle memory. It's a protective coating around the cell wall, you might say. Or you could put it this way: why do so many people forget their past lifetimes? They don't remember where they've come from. That's because of this root ignorance called mula vidya that attends us during life. Some people call it maya. Another tradition calls it samsara. It's basically rounds of birth and death lived in ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of our true nature as being birthless, timeless, deathless, and beyond cause and effect, karma, outside of the reach of karma or cause and effect. We have to focus in on that one reality. Seek thee first the kingdom of heaven, and all else will be added unto thee, if you want to put it that way. So concentrating on this kingdom of heaven within, which is a birthless, deathless, changeless place, a place of pure spirit, in fact, beyond all particles, we then come to know our true nature, and we're bound to remember it when we're reborn, as the great seers and sages of the world do. For instance, say Dalai Lama is a popular figure, and he's supposed to have lived 14 conscious lifetimes or so as a bodhisattva, that's a realized soul, and come back to earth to help others. So that means there is a memory somewhere back in the subconscious mind, or we call it the subtle body, or the causal body, that has stored all memory of these various lifetimes we've lived. Sri Krishna talks about it in the Bhagavad Gita too. He says to Arjuna, I've lived many lifetimes and I remember all mine, but Arjuna, you've lived many lifetimes too, but you don't remember yours yet. So this is one of the things that is supposed to occur to the meditator as they begin to focus inside on this great light. As we were just chanting when I opened up, this Brahman, the light of Brahman, or the Brahman effulgence. We have to sharpen our mind with thoughts on reality alone, and then inform our mind with the non-dual teachings from the revealed scriptures, not the fundamentalist teachings from dualistic scriptures, but the revealed teachings from these revealed scriptures, and then point that inwards with a great force on this Atman dwelling in the heart. There within the heart, where all the subtle nerve endings meet, like the chariot wheels hub, like the spokes of a chariot wheel, abides the Atman. Meditate upon that self as Om, the word, and Godspeed to you into crossing over beyond all darkness. So that is one of the great sayings of these revealed scriptures called Upanishads, which we also chanted about today. Upanishadam Mahastram, the great sayings of the Upanishads, or the revealed scriptures, which the West hasn't really encountered en masse yet. Only a few of us have looked into these great non-dual scriptures. So this word for causal memory is vacant, is missing in our tradition. We don't have a word in English really for it. So Smriti Bedu, you'd have to look into the ancient Sanskrit in order to be informed that you have deep within you a memory of many lifetimes that you've lived, and you will come upon them like that trail of breadcrumbs when you begin to meditate and look within you. So that's one of the facets of this wisdom particle that we've been studying. We started out right at the beginning 5 or 6 weeks ago with that teaching on subtle and causal memory. For all of you who are maybe new to the Vedanta, we're usually thinking in terms of triputtis, or triple teachings. For instance, there's an outer world, an inner world, and a transcendent world. There's an outer body, your physical body. There's an inner body, your mental body, and then there's a causal body. These are called stula sharira, sukshma sharira, karana sharira. They have names for them in the ancient language. So they taught their children, you have 3 bodies actually, not just one. And further they've said, and guess what? You're not any of those 3 bodies. You're something else entirely. But those are the 3 coverings which you've taken on, you've assumed. And later thinkers then began to think, maybe there's actually a way of subdividing this into a wider category. Basically, they called it the Adara system, and they started talking about sheaths that human consciousness put on. Or maybe you could say divine consciousness if you're a realized soul. Basically, you've put on the sheath of an ego, a separate self with a name and a form. You've put on a sheath of intellect, your thinking process. You've put on a sheath of mind, dual mind, which is always considering pro and con, good and bad, pleasure and pain. It's full of dualities. Then you put on a sheath of energy, prana. Man does not live by bread alone. So there's another energy we live by that isn't just from food. It's causing me to speak, it's causing you to hear. It's carrying our thoughts in meditation. It's carrying our thoughts after the time of death to another body, to our subtle body. It takes our body, our consciousness into deep sleep tonight. It's prana, it's called. In Hawaii, we call it mana. And there are names for it in other traditions, but unfortunately in our Western materialistic tradition, we don't think in terms of it. We just think in terms of material cause. We don't think in terms of a remote cause or a primal cause, something that caused all of this. So this sheath of prana is the 4th sheath you've taken on, and then the 5th sheath you've taken on is called Annamaya Kosha. Anna means food. So it's a sheath of food. It's your gross body. So this is what the young child learned when they were growing up in India in ancient times, probably before the subcontinent was even called India. It was probably back when it was called Bharat, the eternal land. And it had a religion called Sanatana Dharma, the eternal religion. And it had been told to them by many hundreds of great realized souls. And even parents were realized souls then. They had learned from their teachers to how to explain the cause and effect relationship of the universe, and also to take the mind beyond the universe into a state of non-duality, into a state of samadhi, or beatific vision, or satori. There are other words for it in different traditions. Coming out of this non-dual state, or what Christ described as if thine eye be single, coming out of that non-dual state, then you would take on these 2 eyes and these 2 ears and so forth, and you would assume duality, and in that process you would assume your different sheaths. And you give them up again at night. So they're really not thinking in terms of birth and death, you see. They're thinking in terms of projection and withdrawal. And everything that happens in between projection and withdrawal is sustenance, is how to sustain. How to keep sustained your spiritual life, for instance, because your spiritual life is what holds these truths. If you let your spiritual life go, then these truths go, and you're not going to remember them, when you come back into the body next time. So that means you have to spend a lifetime concentrating on these truths, on thoughts of reality alone, we just chanted. The more time you can spend in those kinds of thoughts on reality, and the less time you can spend in thoughts of pleasure, in thoughts of boredom, in thoughts of brooding, in thoughts of depression, in thoughts of insouciance, in thoughts of mere intellectual study alone, secularism and so forth, the better for you. Because then the more time you can spend with thoughts on reality, the more the memories of your true nature begin to come forward. And that's what you see when you see a seer, or a divine incarnation, or a great luminary. You actually see a person who's brought everything forward from their subconscious and unconscious mind, what we call subtle body and causal body, brought it forward, and now they're just wearing it in their consciousness, you see. You look at them and speak to them, and all they speak to you is truth, and all they reflect is truth. And that's all they're interested in. They're not interested in low-grade mantras like, how's the weather? So this is how to reverse the trend of a bad habit, a habit of mundane human convention, the habit of superficiality, and dig deep into your consciousness, which is full of profundity. It's full of particles of wisdom. See, that's what this is. This is one tiny, fragmentary, minuscule, smaller than an atomic particle, bit of intelligence in your own mind, and that comes from a stream of intelligence. It's called light, with a capital L. In Sanskrit, jyoti. When you see the light, then you're seeing a stream of these particles coming at you. When you hear me speak, a stream of these particles are coming at you right now. But you're going to have to develop subtle eyes to see them, subtle ears to hear them. All your senses are going to have to become purified, and then you'll not only realize this transmission that's coming at you, which is not just a discourse or a lecture or a class. It's a transmission of wisdom particles. And you'll be able to recognize it because your wisdom particles are intact and receptive. So that's what this is, these arrows. Inward, outward, and both ways. The cell wall, the intelligent cell, has retentive memory. That is, it keeps inside of it, without it leaching outward, everything that you've ever seen, heard, tasted, touched, or smelled. Everything you've ever experienced in all the series of your lifetimes is stored inside you in an essential form. All the forms also that you've seen and experienced before are also stored inside you in what's called unmanifested prakriti. That is, sky, trees, ocean, leaves, flowers, bodies, houses. That's all manifested prakriti. Prakriti is a word for nature, by the way. But all of this has come from inside. From the infinite, the finite has come. But being infinite, nothing but infinite remains. It's all infinite. It's all endless. It's all eternal. It's all originless. We can't think in terms of beginnings, middles, and ends and understand truth. Hope to understand truth. It's not going to work. You're going to have to think beyond cycles, like Buddha did. That's why he sat under the bo tree for 49 or 50 days until he had his nirvana, his realization of how to get out of the cycles of time, how to get out of the cycles of space, how to get out of cycles of rebirth. Gatam, Gatam, Paragatam. I've gone beyond all goals to the supreme goal, the Paragatam. I got out of the river And I watched the river and I saw that it just cycled and circled all the time. When I saw that, out of the river of time, the river of human birth and death, I wanted out of it. So I divorced nature, because nature is where form begins, unmanifested nature, and I became a Buddha. What does Buddha mean? Intelligence. I got a hold of my own intelligence. I found the own stream of my own intelligent particle, and I merged in it. And I merged that into Brahman, into Buddha nature, in his case, is how he would say it. So everything that's outgoing senses, outgoing sight, outgoing sound, outgoing taste, you're to grab a hold of that, turn it, concentrate it, and put it inside of you. Turn it inside, and then you'll find these wisdom realms. We're just going to call them worlds, but when we say worlds in English, we think outward planets. See? But these aren't outer worlds, these are inner worlds, so you have to use words like loka, these inner realms. See? Or akasha. Akasha means space, an inner space. We don't have words that are equivalent to that in English. So we have to look at the meanings of these profound ancient words, through which a whole cross-section of an entire subcontinent got illumined. It's a language that people got illumined by using it. They used it for illumination, not for making money, which is basically what we use language for, bottom line, to make money. So a thoroughly unmaterialistic culture with its aim completely on the spiritual side of existence, or you could say on existence itself with a capital E. You could argue for centuries, as Europe and American philosophers have done, whether or not God exists. But if you looked into ancient India, you'd find out that they never had that argument. They started out on the premise that God is existence. It's not whether or not God exists. You're missing the point when you ask the question. It's that you're missing God by overlooking the truth of existence. Everyone says, I am. Nobody says, I'm not. So with every breath we affirm the nature of existence, and therefore we affirm the existence of God, or Brahman, or Yahweh, or Buddha nature, or Allah, however you want to speak it. There are words for that divine reality, as careful as they are in applying them. So both inward going and also pervasive. The intelligent cell has a vyapakatma characteristic. That is, it pervades everything. It doesn't just emanate out, and it doesn't just retreat inwards. It has an emanation. You see, it's all pervasive in both ways. It goes both inward and outward. It pervades the entire periphery of consciousness. It is consciousness with a capital C. That's the word Chaitanya. And also you see down here we looked at the force of Chit Shakti at the lower left-hand part of this chart. Chit Shakti is a word that the father of yoga used for the divine mother of the universe. Many people are saying that the earth is producing our food. But it's actually, the earth mother isn't producing our food, the divine mother is producing our food. We're only looking at the outer cause when we looked at the 5 elements, earth, air, fire, water, and ether. But if we look at the purveyor of the 5 elements, then we find there's this Shakti power, this force, that so many beings are feeling intuitively, but they don't have words for. Even physicists are giving it names like Gayatri and so forth. an ancient name in India for Divine Mother, Gaia. So this Divine Mother is the ultimate cause of everything. And emanates forth, pervading everything. That's that word, pervasion, you see. All pervasion. It's a good word in English. And that's why thousands of devotees are now singing Jaya Jaya Janani Jaya Shri Sharadamani Karuna Rupini Ma Jaya Jaya Janani Jaya Shri Sharadamani Karuna Rupini Ma Nikhil Jagad Mata Jiva Yana Vata Rajapatavritama means the subtlemost, so modest, so retiring, so hidden. Or you could sing it. Rajapatavrite nicham sharada jnana daike vapebhyona shadaraksha kripamayi namostute. Kripamayi namostute. However you sing it, in whatever hymn, which, as I've said, there have been hundreds and hundreds written in a very short time, to the Divine Mother of the Universe since the advent of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who is the Kali avatar of the age. That is, he's come to bring the remembrance, divine remembrance of the Mother of the Universe who dwells in all hearts, who placed consciousness in all souls. And so the purveyor, the proprietress of all these streams, countless streams of consciousness, so teachings would come forth about the five sheaths, as we say, you see, but you should try and transcend the five sheaths. You've taken on these coverings, these veils. Imagine in India you say there are some 5 different kleshas or obstacles to realization of yourself. The first would be ignorance of your true nature. It's called the first hell. Second would be egotism, thinking yourself to be a separate self. I and my Father are two, if you want to put it that way. Or I and my Father are different. And the third is attachment to unreal things. And the fourth is aversion. And the fifth is clinging to life. Or sometimes you could call it fear of death. So if you've come to this fifth and lowest hell called fear of death, then you've fallen so low, you can't fall any lower. Fear of death is the lowest of all hells to fall into. So what they're saying here is that if you believe yourself to be a body that is born and that lives and that dies, then you're basically in hell. That's how they would interpret the word hell. They call it patala, a lower sunken ground it's called. Patala means sunken ground. So if you're attached to your material body, then that's the predicament that mankind finds himself in. And for lifetime after lifetime, that creates a web of samsara, a cycle that rolls on and on. Samsara pragbara. It's a flow of souls. It's not a flow of intelligent enlightenment. It's a flow of rebirth and death and ignorance. again and again. So the time to wake up is now. O mind, awaken, you must, you must. This is a famous song in India. O mind, awaken, you must, you must. Do your studies, because any student that doesn't study is spanked soundly and put to bed without supper. So do your studies means start attending upon this divine wisdom. It's here for us now. Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciple, brought it to us in 1893 at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago. It was put on by the Christians, but the Christians had some surprises in store for them when they asked some luminaries from the ancient East to come over. Not that Christ wasn't from the East. The sun rises in the East, but it sets in the West. See? So here these teachings have come upon us. It's time for us to imbibe them and rejuvenate ourselves. And so, considering the stream of consciousness that is flowing all the time, called Kaivalya Pragbara, then take yourself out of that stream of samsara Pragbara and wake up. See, place yourself in the company of the saints and the seers and the sages. Another beautiful song in India. Oh, when will I have the company of Jesus, Moses, Gauranga, Muhammad? When will I dance and sing in company with these great souls? So there's a universal idea. See, somebody who has transcended not only human limitation, kleshas, imperfections and so forth, but somebody who's also thinking in terms of the universal religion. Or if you put it this way, there's no such thing as a foreign religion. That all religion is indigenous to your soul. All religion is indigenous to your soul. All religion is indigenous to your soul. So we'll throw away the term foreign religion. It doesn't make sense. One consciousness, one heart. There must be one religion too. It's called non-duality, and it's what we've been studying for 5-6 weeks here in these classes, which, by the way, are being live streamed around the world. Thank you, live stream audience, for joining us here in our little ashram in Honeka'a, Hawaii, with some 15 of us here today, and all here to conclude this class on the wisdom particle and non-duality. So some little bit of review we just did on this cell wall. You see, it's got the pervading power, it's got the emanating power, and it's got the all-pervasive power, all three. You'll find that most of the teachings in India are done in threes. They're called triputis. Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, 3 states of your consciousness. You're supposed to meditate on all of them and master all of them. They go with the 3 matras of Om, A, U, and M, the word. Also stands for creation, preservation, and destruction. Also stands for Father, Mother, and Guru. Also stands for the in-breath, the held breath, and the expelled breath. Anywhere you go, in yoga, in Samkhya, in Buddhism, in Vedanta, in any of the Indian darshanas or clear ways of seeing, you'll find it's filled with triputis, triple teachings. Like gross body, subtle body, causal body. And all of a sudden I find out, well, I have 3 bodies, and oh, guess what? That's where I go to sleep. When I go to sleep tonight, I go to my subtle body. When I dream, I'm in my subtle body because I still have air, earth, fire, water, and ether, don't I? In fact, I'm conjuring them up with my own consciousness. So it must be a pointer or a key that says that I have created all these worlds myself, which then should lead me to the conclusion that God does not create. I'm doing all this. The human being's doing the creating. God's a create. It won't lift a finger. It's still. It won't think, it's mindless. It's pure consciousness. No forms arise in it. No worlds arise in it. No movement takes place in it. Like you when you meditate, if you're doing it right. You cut time down, you destroy all worlds, just like you do in deep sleep tonight. However, you do it in deep sleep, but it comes back on you, doesn't it? It kicks back on you as you wake up again with all the same problems you went to sleep with. But if you could stay in deep sleep, there's no problems there. There's no causes of problems there. There's no children, there's no cell phones, there's no money. There's no suffering. In fact, there's just bliss there. Deep sleep is called bliss. That's why you can experience it for 15 minutes and feel so refreshed. But you can dream for 8 hours and wake up a nervous wreck. So it's still, it's silent. It must have turned back in on itself and with the power of its own intelligence merged itself. So that's why the intelligent cell has the power of merging. See? It has a power of actually destroying, dissolving power it's called. We looked at that. Arupa manonasha. Nasha means to destroy, mano means mind, and arupa means no form. So put those three together, those three Sanskrit words together, and you get some sort of inkling of what you meditate on if you're a non-dualist. The mind, you destroy the mind because the mind is the producer of all form. Like we just said that in deep sleep tonight, you're creating worlds and frolicking amongst them. You're flying in them. You're walking in them. You taste in a dream. You hear in a dream. You see in a dream. So you must have 5 elements and 5 senses to do that. Just like you have 5 elements out here and 5 senses out here to do that. So that's called your subtle body. You have a subtle body you go into every night. The thing is that you want to do it consciously now. If a teacher comes to you and says, fine, listen to this, now sit in meditation and try and go into your subtle body consciously. Mostly people are fantasizing about it, or daydreaming, or imagining. But imagining and envisioning are 2 different things. Yesterday's imagining is tomorrow's envisionment. It is if one day you get some guidance, inner guidance, then you can sit and meditate and begin to open up the doorway to your inner worlds. There's a whole cosmos within you, out of which the outer cosmos came. But we haven't made the connections yet, so that's why we're going to connect water to taste, earth to smell, sun to sight, right? Air to touch, and hearing to ether. Now, if we've connected the 5 elements to our 5 senses, we have the grounds for yoga. Yoga means union. So without these connections, we're living a fragmented life. We don't know ourselves. We don't know why we're here. We don't know where we're going. We don't know where we came from. And so about as profound as a culture can be is to say, who am I? You see. But before they get to such a profound question, they're asking questions like, where have we come from? Well, you've come along subtle nerves. Hundreds and thousands of subtle nerves that are a part of your subtle body. And you leave your body and go into your subtle body tonight through those same subtle nerves. Do you think there's a human being walking around with enough nerves and blood vessels to reach to New York? Is not some symbol for divinity? Your own body is a symbol for divinity. You look in the mirror, you're looking at God in manifested form. So if everything is moving by the prana, the life force, which is not by breath alone, and everyone's moving about, everyone's breathing, everyone's blinking their eyes without knowing it, and all of that energy is going on outside, then where do you think you go after you die? Where do you think you go when you go to sleep tonight? Into those subtle nerves. They're not ones you can dissect and see, because your subtle body isn't something you can see either. Nobody can see the mind. You can see the brain, but the brain isn't the mind. The mind has to do with consciousness. The mind is the kingdoms of heaven within you. The great mind holds everything. Unmanifested Prakriti. All of nature in a potential form is held back in the mind, which is precisely why we don't believe in birth and death in my tradition. Birth and death are illusions. The fifth and lowest hell, as I was saying, you'd fall into if you believed in death. All you believe in is eternal life. This is why Christ told the fishermen along the river, "Come, I'll give you eternal life." There's more here than just boats and fish and nets and wives and children and loaves and wine. You need an inner life. I'll make you fishers of men. So you can imagine a great soul like that looking at us, whether it's along a river or sitting beside the Ganga Pacifica. You could look at us and say, there's divinity unawares. Angels unawares. See, that's the name of one of Vivekananda's poems. He came here to the West and he saw all these marvelous souls, all unaware of their true nature. So, shake them up, O wisdom mother, strip from them this Maya cover. So we take the coverings off the gift. See? And that's basically what this quote is about. It's the very first quote we took, in case you don't remember. He's talking here about the 5 sheaths. I'll read it to you because you're too far away to probably see it. The bodies of beings which appear in the form of a framework of bones and sinews is the self of the nature of food. Sheath number 1. Right? It's appearing to you in the framework of bones and sinews. Further within, okay, now we're talking about further within in consciousness, not further within the body. Because further within the body you're going to have blood and pus and phlegm and all sorts of other things. You're going to have to look at the rasas and the dhatus and the various elements of the body. That has to do with health on a physical level. But if you want to look at spiritual health, he says, further within, the self of prana is split into 5. Self of prana split into 5. I think even accidentally I might have brought a chart about that. Here are the 5 pranas and the forms of the one Eka prana. The 5 pranas here listed as Udana, Prana, Samana, Apana, and Vyana. I know what you're thinking. Pana, Pana, Upana, Prana. Prana. So basically you have things like your breathing process, prana, apana, your outward breathing process. The same energy as when you're going to sneeze is a prana. That's the inward moving prana. Chu is the outward moving prana. And then you have a prana that's circulating the nutrients through your blood. You have a prana that's all pervasive. It's like our wisdom cell, it's everywhere at once. And you have a prana that's raising your thoughts. The yogi or the yogini likes to get a hold of that prana that helps raise the thoughts. Because then he'll give up brooding forever, he'll never be bored, and he'll only be interested in higher wisdom. And he'll dwell in higher wisdom while he lives, as he dies, and if he's reborn. And in the bardo state in between, he'll live in wisdom all the time. He never leaves wisdom ever again. It's like his default zone. I will not go any lower than wisdom. So these 5 pranas are another quintuplication. You see, like 5 elements, 5 subtle senses, 5 pranas, and so forth. If you add up 4 of them, you get 20, and you add fourfold mind to it, you get 24, and this is where India got its 24 cosmic principle system. It's called Sankhya Yoga, by the great luminary Lord Kapila. Thank you very much, Lord Kapila. Everyone borrowed from it. Buddhism, Vedanta, yoga, everyone borrowed from it. It was the first seer to do his homework. Categorized the basic principles of the universe, the tattvas, into 24. So when you look into systems like that, you'll see this all-pervasive consciousness at the foundation and this movement of prana throughout. If it's really refined, we tend to call it Shakti power. It's of a more sentient and illumined variety. But as it comes down the ladder, trickle down into the sheaths, as we're talking about here, into these 5 sheaths, then pretty soon it comes the nature of food. Like you said, it comes the nature of body. It's in the form of a framework of bones and sinews first. Then it's in the form of a prana, you see, split into 5 parts. Deeper still, it is the self of the nature of mind. Even deeper than it is the self of the nature of intelligence. And deepest of all leads to the self of the nature of bliss. That's what this says here. Basically, it's just outlined for us, for all of us, the constituents of our non-self. The 5 sheaths they're called. Five sheaths. To finish out the quote here, food is pervaded by vital energy. Vital energy is pervaded by mind. Mind is pervaded by intelligence, and that ever-happy intelligence is pervaded by bliss. This self of bliss is pervaded by Brahman, the witness, the innermost of all. Brahman is not pervaded by anything else, neither by action nor begetting children nor by anything else, but only by knowing that Brahman does one attain peace. So basically, in 1 or 2 slokas, the Upanishad is giving us the description of our non-self in 5 levels: body, energy, mind, thought or intelligence, and ego. And it's called the 5-fold non-self, the Adara system, or the 5 koshas, if you'd rather say it. 5 koshas. Kosha is like a container for something. Now, beyond all those 5 sheaths is Brahman. It's not pervaded by anything else. In fact, it pervades all this. So now you can see why the intelligent particle is important to know, because it has this pervading quality and it has this withdrawing quality, or dissolving quality, called arupa mananasha. And therefore, it puts the soul, that is you, in charge of your 5 sheaths. And it also makes you responsible for your own enlightenment. That is, you may begin working right now in coursing through your 5 sheaths. You course through your 5 sheaths, basically, you would be looking at something like this. 5 sheaths and their properties. In case there is any doubt about what your 5 sheaths are, let's start at the bottom. I'll give you the list. The sheath of food or matter is the transformation of food. It lives by food and dies without food. Being skin, bone, flesh, and marrow, it cannot be the Atman, the soul, which is unchanging. It is insentient, an object of the senses, and is a non-enjoyer. It is material, undergoes change, borrows its life, has various attributes, and is controlled. It has a cause, and itself causes ignorance and identification with unreal things. That's the description given by the non-dualists about one's body. So you could probably, if you read that and meditated on it, lose fascination with your body pretty quickly, which will be a healthy thing, to become detached from your body. Now, the self, the description of the pranamaya kosha, the sheath of vital energy, they call it, because prana doesn't have a very easy way of defining in English. You'd have to call it, the closest thing we'd get would be vital force. Élan vital in French, if you will. The pranamaya kosha, that sheath of energy that is your second sheath, that is not as gross as the body, but a little subtler, consists of 5 organs of action and 5 vital forces, which we just looked at. Dwelling in and permeating, it engages beings in all works. People are driven by a force, not by bread alone, but by some force. That's their energy. If you want to define energy deeper and look into it and meditate upon energy, you'll see that that's prana. And it's a missing link in our Western thinking. Prana. We don't think in terms of what makes the eye see. We only think in terms of the eye and seeing. We don't think of what makes the ear hear. We only think of the ear flap, what to pin on it to make ourselves look good, and the fact that I'm hearing. But we don't think of what the power of hearing is. What is it that's causing me to hear? Vibration. You start to trace vibration, you'd get back to the intelligent particle. What makes the tongue taste, what makes us feel, and so forth. So basically, that's this pranamaya kosha engages beings in all works. Or as I was saying in a class last week or the week before, you talk about addictions. The greatest of all addictions is this prana. It's more addicting than drugs, more addicting than alcohol, more addicting than foods. Any enjoyment you can possibly think of, because it is actually the animating force that's causing people to seek after these things. So if you can control the prana, you can control life. You can control the mind. You can control the senses and the body. So the yogis, when they teach you yoga, and I'm not talking about hatha, when you're learning the 8-limbed yoga, the first requisite is get a hold of the prana and control it. I teach these teachings in prisons. So when I go to prisons, I'm talking to some of the inmates. They tell me their stories. You know what I'm thinking, basically. Because they didn't have a hold of the prana, they did this crime. They, just like us, these inmates, most of them. And so they just followed an urge and weren't able to control in the moment something. So they didn't have full control of their prana, so that's why they hit somebody or murdered somebody or stole something. And then their life went downhill from there. So getting control of the prana is an extremely important thing for not only for learning how to be a yogi, it is for gaining enlightenment, but also for keeping your life under control. The prana also here moves like the wind inside and out, so it is not immutable like the Atman. This is an important point because most people think then when they find the prana and they get sort of addicted to the life force, they think they've found God. God is life force. God is life. But life is another triputi along with birth and death. Birth, life, and death are triputis. They all change. If you're looking for eternal life, you're going to have to look for something beyond the prana. Because the prana moves inside and out like the wind, and because it waxes and it wanes, it cannot be reality. That's the summation of the seers. It cannot be reality because it moves. And we just discussed Brahman a little while ago, saying it was immovable, it was silent, it was still, it was all pervasive, it doesn't have to move. If you were all pervasive, would you have to go anywhere? More like the spider web of the spider. She knows everything is happening everywhere, you see, by these strands. So these strands of prana come out from the Divine Mother and knows everything is happening, so she doesn't have to move. She's all pervasive. It's a nice word to meditate on. This prana has no knowledge of itself, and essentially it's insentient. It will wane out of the senses and out of the body. It waxes and it wanes. So, in that case, we know that it's not the absolute reality. And also, it has no distinction of knowledge between what's good and bad. The prana can do a bad act, cause you to do a bad act. It can also cause you to do a good act. But Shakti power would not do that. A person who is illumined, in possession of the wisdom particle, would not do an adharmic act. It would be against their nature. So what's in keeping with your nature is reality, and that reality is Brahman. The prana doesn't know the distinction between good and bad. So these are the way they describe to make sure you don't mistake the second sheath for reality. Now, how about the mind? For those of us who have gone beyond the body, and it's obvious that the body is born and dies, and it's not the true self, we're looking for something a little bit more eternal and more majestic than just the physical body, then we go to the mind. That is, us intellectuals, those of us who think deeper and so forth. We start thinking, well, maybe the mind is reality. Maybe that's the ultimate thing. Well, here's what the Manomaya Kosha, the sheath of the mind, consists of, according to those who have looked at it. They haven't looked at it with an electron microscope either, because it cannot be seen with that. They've looked at it with their third eye, with their mind made single, their eye made single. They looked into the mind, and they said that it consists of the organs of feeling and mind. As when you look for the emotions which are causing you such problem, you won't find them in the heart, you'll find them here in the mind. The seat of the emotions and all the troubles are in the head. It's a very important piece of information to acquire. It infills the other two sheaths and thinks itself separate from the other sheaths. So that is, prana and body, mind infills them. And it would actually inform them. So mind is getting closer to the sentient principle because it's getting closer to intelligence, and of course closer to the intelligent particle, the stream of consciousness. So mind is more light. In fact, you know how they describe it in Vedanta, is that the sun is, Brahman is like the sun, and the mind and intelligence is like the moon. So the moon is borrowing light from the sun, isn't it? It doesn't have its own light. And therefore they say mind and intelligence is borrowing light from somewhere. Most people don't take the time to find out where. They don't go inside and see, where is the origin of my mind? And where is the origin of my intelligence? Now you see why I would present you with the intelligent particle, because you'd have to get on a ride from the mind and intelligence, and that ride is called getting on the stream of particles that are going inward toward the source. Where is the source? Om, the Word. In the beginning was the Word is with God, and the Word was God. That's how Christ said it when he meditated in Gethsemane and saw it. When Sri Ramakrishna saw it, he said, when I first encountered the Word inside of me, I saw that all worlds were coming out of it and dissolving back into it. And it wasn't taking any time to do this. It didn't take 4,320,000,000 years in order for the worlds to evolve. They were getting evolved and dissolved in the eternal moment all the time. Sort of sounds like what we're doing every day, isn't it? Days pass, weeks pass, months pass, years pass. Nothing changes. Essentially, nothing changes. Everything's getting dissolved and projected every day by 7 billion people now. And you don't think that the ancestors are doing the same in their realm? And the celestials are doing the same in their realm? And the gods and goddesses are doing the same in their realm? These are the kingdoms within you. Your ancestors are within you. You're farthest away from them when they take on a body. That's when the distance happens. As soon as they give up the body, there's no death. They simply merge back into consciousness. That consciousness is you. So it's not just some New Age fancy that we're walking around saying all is one and this kind of thing with these cliches. There's philosophical proof, strong grounds for contemplating these axioms of Advaita Vedanta and coming to understand them and becoming illumined in them, becoming adept at knowing them. This is the purpose of life. Vivekananda put it nicely. He said, knowledge is the highest thing, the second highest thing. It's the first compound out the gate, intelligence. So, worldly knowledge will satisfy you for a little while, but spiritual knowledge will satisfy you for all times. When you hear the truth will set you free. Then that freedom has no boundaries, has no weights on it. But these koshas are specifically the weights that we're dealing with right now. The 5 koshas. Body we've looked at, energy we looked at, and now we're looking at mind. It infills the other 2 sheaths and thinks itself separate. It depends on the 5 senses for its knowledge. Oops. Big mistake. The senses are defective. Why? Because they're outward going. That's why the yogis turn them inside. You'd have to transcend the physical universe made of atomic particles, wouldn't you? I mean, there are songs about it. Actually, songs about it. Kshina smakina sakaruna jabanti mudajana ashtakyantvi dantu aha dehatma vadaturaha. What does it mean? We will crush the stars to atoms. We will unhinge the universe. Don't you know who we are? We are the children of immortal bliss. It might have sounded like a pretty little tune, but the words are anything but surface. You see. We will crush the stars to atoms. I mean, in a sense, hasn't our quantum physics done that already? Crushed the stars to atoms? Really? I mean, he sang that, he said that actually, Swami Vivekananda, back in 1893. Long before, that was when Nikola Tesla was living and people like that. He went to the first World's Fair and saw Nikola Tesla's demonstrations there and electricity and all that. But Vivekananda and the people from India were always thinking about, we have crushed the stars to atoms. We had to wait around until we had enough money and wealth to invent an electron microscope and had enough time to place it on the object and take a strip of the object apart and look at it and see that it was made of quarks and neutrons and the subatomic particles and that they were all changing at a billionth of a second and still were attached to the world. But we can't give it up. Why, egotism, attachment, aversion, clinging to life? Attachment's the third hell, isn't it? We're attached to things that are unreal. Our quantum physicists basically have showed us that all of this is vibrating particles, vibrating at a billionth of a second, yet still we can't give it up. when Lord Buddha gave this teaching 550 years prior to Christ, he called it shunyata, emptiness. Now, there's a conclusion one can get behind, you see. Not only explain it, but give a word to it. Shunyata, emptiness. Oh, I see, the whole thing's empty. So we looked at the intelligent particle, and we saw that it has that ability to destroy all things, to render all things empty as they are. Empty of what? Empty of substance, for one thing. Empty of the ability to fulfill you. It's another. Can objects ever fulfill you? The predicament of man is that the mind has created objects, so he's created the worlds, and then he's come out and embodied himself in one of these objects called the body, and he's sporting among those very objects that he projected with his mind. Then he loses them, and he becomes depressed. Yet they're still within him. He can manufacture them again and again, and he does every time he wakes up and goes to sleep. People are thinking, well, maybe tomorrow will be a better day. Why don't you just plan for it to be a better day? It's your day, you see. You're in charge of it. If you lost something, get it back tomorrow. Because it's always yours. That's what eternity means. What's in a word, they say? A lot. Everything's in a word. So we will crush the stars to atoms, and we will unhinge the universe. That's what you're doing when you're looking at the five sheaths. The universe hinges are body, energy, mind, intellect, and ego. Ego was the first hinge. That was your first mistake, thinking yourself to be separate from God in the first place. That's what ego does. It's the separate eye maker. There is one I, capital I. There is no other. There can be none other. Eye of consciousness. The third eye, if you want to call it that. Different spelling. Yet, look at how many eyes have come out of it. And each one thinking, my watch keeps the only right time. I'm the only real I. My religion's the only real religion. My God is the only real God. My wisdom is the only actual wisdom. This is the doings of the separate eye maker, called ego. He's a rascal. If there were a devil in my tradition, it would be ego. So these are the hinges which we're unhinging. We will crush the stars to atoms. Okay, we did that. We saw through the physical particle. We now know that there are life force particle, where our ancestors go. We now know that there's a mental particle, where the celestials abide in heavens. We now know that there's an intellectual particle, where the saints and the seers and the sages keep their subtle bodies. And we now know that there's a trinity, you see, an ultimate reality, or the word, Om. And about that time, particles don't make no never mind anymore, you see. The sugar cube's already dissolved in the tea. No crystals left. It's all one homogeneous mass now of sweet, blissful liquid. And luckily I know about it and I can immerse myself in it, you see. I go into it every night in deep sleep. Why can't I go into it every time I meditate? And certainly, why shouldn't I go there when I drop this body? Otherwise, I'll come back in another body, still not knowing. And then again, still not knowing. And the whole thing becomes redundant. Why do you think people are bored with life? They've been there, they've done that. How many umpteen times, you see? There's nothing new under the sun. That's why Buddha got out of the river of time. That's why he got his nirvana. He got off the merry-go-round of the world. See? It's fun at first, then you get a little nauseous. Stay in the bath too long, you get wrinkled, right? It's old age. I've experienced old age enough, thank you. So, crush the stars to atoms and unhinge the universe. And then sing. Hamsa hamsaya vidmahe Paramahamsaya dhimohi. Everything has a good Gayatri connected with it. And make sure to say Om afterwards. That's the ultimate Om. It's the unstruck sound. It's the uncaused cause. It's the unseen seer. It's the inactive agent. It hums like 1,000 bumblebees in between the ears, from the heart chakra on up. About the mind, it retains its existence and interest via sense life objects and desires. That's the ordinary mind. It is the very home of ignorance and the cause of all bondage. The mind is the problem, not the body. It causes the universe to appear and disappear by its projecting power, like that intelligent cell, right? So we are here. Causes the universe to appear and disappear by its projecting power. The mind has a huge amount of power for projecting and withdrawing. Even ignorant minds do that. They project and they withdraw in ignorance. They create and they destroy in ignorance, don't they? But if you get an illumined mind, then you have this power of atmic projection, you see, projecting sport of consciousness and withdrawing back again without gaining or losing a thing. You can't take anything away from Brahman, you can't add anything to Brahman. 400,000 beings can die in a tidal wave and Brahman won't change one iota. Reality is changeless, birthless, deathless, and so forth. Learn your lessons well and be birthless and deathless. Crush the stars to atoms, unhinge the universe, be yourself. Then try and engage in a life. They asked Swami Vivekananda once, should a man be reborn? After he had given him all these teachings about the risks, about the downside of it. And he answered, I certainly hope he will not be reborn. Not until he can do so in full consciousness. So that's the challenge, you see, for the aspiring yogi or yogini, is to try and project and withdraw in full consciousness. Do everything in the Dharma, if you want to put it that way. You all know what the Dharma is, right? The mind also binds the soul to the body and objects via attachment and frees it from them via non-attachment. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the mind is the gateway to hell. It's also the doorway to heaven. So it's up to you to choose. Which way will you take it? You'll have to take this mind with you, my dear, after you leave the body. That's how Holy Mother put it. You'll have to take this mind with you after you leave the body. So make sure it's in fine shape. Keep it in fine shape while you live. Keep it in good control, and also maintain it at the time of your death. A conscious death is a very precious thing. Don't be afraid of death. Death doesn't exist. It's an illusion. It's just a transition into another state of consciousness. Just like walking into one room and walking out of another. See, so Sri Ramakrishna passed away and Holy Mother was bereft. So she was taking off her jewelry and her red bordered sari. Widows in India just wear white and don't wear any jewelry. And Sri Ramakrishna walked in the room. This was after his passing. And he said, "Why are you doing that?" "I haven't died. I've just passed from one room to another." This was her first vision of him after he passed away. So the devotees sing, Jaya Shri Ramakrishna Bhagavan Karunamaya Jaya Kripa Nidana. Sing it with me. Jaya Shri Ramakrishna Bhagavan Karunamaya Jaya Kripa Nidana. Jaya Shri Ramakrishna Bhagavan Karunamaya Jaya Kripa Nidana. Gudi Rama Ke Tanaya Dulare Chandramani Ma Kedrigatari. Jaya Shri Ramakrishna Bhagavan Karunamaya Jaya Kripa Nidana. Om. Forget to end with Om. So the devotees, by the thousands now, I think 4 million now, sing Jaya Shri Ramakrishna Bhagavan, the great Lord, victory to the great Lord, who conquered lust and greed, who saw through the 5 sheaths and identified himself with Atman, who practiced all religions and realized the essence in them all. Universality came embodied in Sri Ramakrishna. That was number 1. And number 2, he brought the Divine Mother of the universe into full view. Because she's usually behind the scenes, hidden. So, this mind gets itself purified by resort to discrimination and detachment. Discrimination between the real and the unreal, and detachment from the unreal. That's the 1-2 punch in Vedanta that puts ignorance to the mat. Learn how to discriminate between what's essential and what's non-essential, what's real and what's unreal. And then remove what's unreal from the mind. That's actually the best discipline, the best yoga of all. If you can find out what's haunting your mind, get in there and remove it. You won't need to do anything else. 100,000 breathing exercises, 1,000,000 asanas would not do that for you. But if you can, by this act of your own willpower, get into your own mind and search out the defects there and remove them, that's your discipline, that's your yoga. Sri Ramakrishna said it was like holding a piece of white paper, looks like it's perfect, you see, and you hold it up to light and you see all these dark specks in it. That's the mind. Seems like it's fine, everyday mind, you see. But put it in the light of the seers or holy company, the guru, spiritual practice, sadhana, then you won't find it so pure and white anymore. You'll see all these hidden defects. And those hidden defects are what are bringing you back into the body in ignorance. Because they're there when you die. If you have to take this mind with you after you go, then it's what you're left with in the bardo of the afterlife, as the Buddhists would call it. There's this bardo that happens between death and rebirth. Actually, there are 3 bardos. One, about 7 days, where the soul tries to identify with the Buddha light, the Buddha nature. And if it fails that, tries to identify with the worlds, the Shambhala worlds, you see, the higher worlds. And if it can't do that, then it has to relive its life again. It has to look and inspect its last life, see what was wrong, and come back and do it all over again to try and improve it. Those are called 3 different bardos. The bardo of death to rebirth happens. It's a span of time, basically. And it's very, very concentrated when it happens to you. And you can be prepared for it. Beings are taken off guard for no reason. Just take your mind and put it into the ocean of the teachings. Like a towel, you dip in an ocean till it's saturated, completely soaked and malleable. See, no ignorance, no devils, no trickery, no hocus pocus. Get a mind that's made of pure light. So saying here basically, purify it by a resort to discrimination and detachment. You don't have to move to do this practice. In fact, it's better for you if you don't. You can do it right here. That's how Buddha did it. Sat under the tree for 49 days. He wasn't going anywhere. He said, enough of this. You want me to tell you his words? O architect of these worlds, I have seen you. Now that I've seen you, I will never again build houses. I will not build houses of wood. I will not build houses of stone. I will not build houses of flesh and bone. And I will not build houses of wise conception. He's talking about koshas, isn't he? There's a physical kosha, your dwelling place, your body, and there's an energy kosha, and then there's a mental kosha, your house of wise conception, you see. But they all come tumbling down in the end. I will not build houses anymore is the essential part of that saying. I will not project, withdraw anymore, you see. If I do anything, it will be to associate with suffering beings. I will not attach to them. So basically, you can associate with your body, you can associate with energy, you can associate with your mind, but never identify with it. Identify only with your Atman. And definitely then associate with these five sheaths, but not don't identify with them. So, deludes itself by creating objects, varieties, distinctions, qualities, and the belief in them. That's the mind's game. Finally, it undergoes change, has a beginning and an end, suffers pain, and is not the seer in the end. So basically you have birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. That's called the six transformations, the six billows. Add hunger and thirst in there and you have Buddhism's six billows. Basically, Vedanta says six transformations. Birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. So the mind is always engaging in this game, you see. That's what it has to suffer. That's what it has to pay. It's to pay the piper by suffering these six transformations. And that's why we know that mind is not the Atman, because of its association with these things. You know, you heard me sing before. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamate, Samprapte Sanihite Kale, Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Karine. That's one verse of a number of verses in this hymn called Bhaja Govindam by Shankara, one of the great non-dualists, lived about 700 AD. And he said in one of these verses, I could sing it, Nalini Dalagata Jalamati Taralam, and so forth, on and on in Sanskrit. He says, when I was a baby, I was attached to my mother's breast. When I was a young boy, I was attached to sport. When I was a young man, I was attached to a young woman. When I was old, I was attached to anxiety because fear of death. But alas, to the Supreme Brahman, I was never attached. Attached to everything but the essential thing. Right? Seek thee first the kingdom of heaven. It's the first spiritual law written in stone of religious life, you see. So attach yourself, make your eye single, and you shall know the truth. Attach yourself to reality. And as on your way, inspect these sheaths. Now, after the break, which we'll take now, we will inspect the Vijnanamaya Kosha, the sheath of intelligence, and the Anandamaya Kosha, the sheath of bliss. You can come up and look at this during the break. Our live streaming audience will have this chart on their screen for the duration of the 15 minutes we're gone.
Can I make an announcement?
And we have one announcement, please.
Well, this is for the live stream audience. We're going to go offline for just a moment, and then we'll be right back showing the charts during the break.
So offline for just a moment. Live stream audience, please stand by. Thank you all. Now let's take our break.
Friends watching, this is exactly what we were talking about yesterday. It's like right there. After and everything, and she's into the Namyo Renge-kyo. I was.
This is the first time that you're here. We have a library and bookstore. I'd like to take a look. Show you where it is.
Welcome back, everyone who is joining us from distant points in the world. Hopefully some of my students in India are catching this, but of course you can always look back on these because they're stored on our website, and Advaita Academy has been so kind as to purchase this equipment for us so that we can. While I'm into making this kind of announcement, I should say that this is our last Sunday meeting for about a month. I'm gone to the SRV ashrams in Portland, Oregon and San Francisco for about a month. There'll still be events here for the locals, local Sangha. There'll be some readings and some meditations and so forth held. Also, though, we plan to live stream from those ashrams in Oregon and in California, so you can check in at the usual time, that is equivalent time. Here in Hawaii will be, I think there's a 3 hours time difference, isn't there?
Right, but it's a different time. It's 9:30 on the West Coast.
9:30 in the morning on the West Coast. So if you want to check in with us, live stream audience, for our live stream classes in Oregon and San Francisco, you may do that over the next month. And of course, the people who are missing the Hawaii classes can tune in then too. So that is an announcement that should be made early. We may even, on retreat in Seattle, we've discussed live streaming the Sunday portion of that Sunday morning class. So those of you who can't make it to Seattle could at least be part of it. So look into that. Now, as far as where we left off in the teachings, we have been looking at the intelligent particle chart these whole 5 weeks, because it's sort of the foundation of all of this teaching. The idea is, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, we have to charge up the chitta. Chitta means that mind stuff. It's an interesting English term, kind of queer English term we've come up with for chitta. Mind stuff means everything our mind is stuffed with, all the thoughts, and of all kinds, positive, negative, and mixed, and fantasies and imaginations and envisionments and higher thoughts too, all there as a part of the chitta. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say, in the human being, that only needs to be charged up, and so it will become like a hot air balloon, buoyant, and it'll just rise instead of rainwater, which just falls and seeks the lowest place to settle, like a cow hoof print in a Death Valley or something very low. So people's mind has a tendency to go downward like that and get depressed and unhappy and despondent and brooding a lot. So giving up that tendency of brooding then and focusing on these teachings, we charge up the chitta and the mind begins to become buoyant, and each day it begins to wake up in that buoyant condition. That's called sattva. Before that, the mind was going through periods of tamas, which somebody mentioned at the break, and rajas. Tamas is slothfulness, heedlessness, dullness, and rajas is frenetic activity. You're probably aware of both of those in your life, having been heavy-minded sometimes and having been very restless, or maybe you still are restless. So the idea is to try to attain sattva, balance of mind, and at that point, teachings will make sense to you. You can hear the exact same teaching from the exact same person, maybe even a day apart, and if your mind is in a sattvic state, it will have an insight. It will be inspired. But if it's in a tamasic or rajasic state, something completely untoward will happen, or something different. You will not get the gist of the teaching. So keeping your mind in this single state, Stiti pragnasya, Krishna used to say. That's why we sing to Krishna quite often. Many of you have probably heard it. Govindam Paripurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Govindam Paripurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Govindam. Govinda, the name for Krishna. And some of the hundreds and hundreds of songs, bhajans are called, and stotrams that have been written for Sri Krishna, who is more like the archetypical soul, the most ancient of avatars, way, way back, along with Ram, which is why Rama and Krishna and our Ramakrishna is so important to us here at SRV associations, because we feel like that ancient, timeless soul has manifested himself again, along with Sita and Radha in the form of Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, and you might even say Hanuman in form of Swami Vivekananda, because they both jumped the ocean. And Swami Vivekananda definitely did that for us in 1893 when he left India and came here. So just mentioning Sri Krishna brings some of those beautiful songs to mind. But he was the one in the Bhagavad Gita that's talking about sthiti pragnasya. Keep your mind steady. Be content with anything. Whatever happens, stay in an even-minded state. Upeksha, the Buddhists call it. It's equanimity. So try to remain unruffled. They say no matter what happens to you, like the father of yoga says, if you get a cold, then if they say, are you sick? You say, no, I'm not sick. My body caught a cold. That's discrimination between the real and the unreal, which we're talking about in these sheaths. So you maintain that stance, I am Atman. Why? Because I have crushed the stars to atoms, I've unhinged the universe. I've looked into the 3 bodies of my non-self. I've examined the 5 sheaths, the 5 koshas, and seen them to be lacking. That is, they're all insentient. And I am pure sentiency. Buddha, I am Buddha. Buddha nature is pure sentiency, you see. Our word in Vedanta is Atman. So when you're looking at the 5 sheaths, you're looking at the 5 sheaths that the Atman has associated with. And that same Atman dissolves them in deep sleep every night and takes them on again when it wakes up and dissolves them again in deep sleep and dreams about them in dream state. So AUM of Om equals waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state. So they want you to master the A of Om, so you master your waking state. You become a master of all this. And then in your dreaming state, you master your dreaming state, you master the U of Om. And I would say probably it's different than what people are talking about, not just lucid dreaming. See, the West gets fascinated with sensationalism and occult powers and things like that. That's their fascination. I mean, take for example all the movies we're seeing with occult powers in them and stuff. So the real point for the yogi is not to have lucid dreaming, because that's just playing with unmanifested nature. It's just playing with thought, playing with your chitta. There's a beautiful song in India, I could sing it, but I'd probably just say it, basically, is, a man has come to me from a land that never sleeps. Now all my dreams have been transformed into meditations. Beautiful. Whoever wrote that song, was a yogi, was a deep practitioner, and realized that dreaming is to be awoken from. So in our tradition, yes, you can interpret dreams. Somebody was talking to me at the break about Sufism and Muslim religion, how important it is to interpret the dreams in that tradition. That's a key to your awakening state. But better than lucid dreaming would be to awaken from all dreams. From dreams awake, from bonds be free. Know the truth. Thou art he, thou art she. Beautiful tantric saying in the tantras. So, and also echoed in the Upanishads. So, thou art he means the man is Shiva. Thou art she means the woman is Shakti. See, this is the divine couple, the eternal divine couple. Kali dances on Shiva's breast. We might have seen these beautiful icons, these pictures. Kali, Shiva has gone supine, fallen flat. He's still got the hearing horn in his ear, you see. He's still hearing Om. He's gone into a deep state of samadhi, you see. And Kali is dancing on his chest, the black goddess. One songwriter sings, why this? Is she so immodest that she would dance on her husband's chest? And the teaching comes back, no, he's the flower, she's the fragrance. She comes out of him, you see, and plays and sports, and then dissolves back into him. There are beautiful songs about that too. Bono boli bhajakali, Icha hoi torjaya chari. So, bono boli bhajakali. The devotion of my mind, manas, mono, is to Mother Kali, see, the divine goddess, as she dances in her sportive play of consciousness, the dynamic principle of Brahman, the dynamic power, the Shakti force, see. So this is where Vedanta and Tantra, those two great streams, begin to merge, they converge and they come apart and they converge throughout time, giving us these beautiful teachings combined with these wonderful deities. Basically, I think the most well-rounded spiritual life means, because some people are saying, I just want the wisdom tradition. Other people are saying, I just want to dance and sing. Two different temperaments. There's one bhakta and one's jnana, right? So the two are one, you see. Bring them together. The wisdom principles, learn all about them. Illumine your mind, because your mind's going with you after death. But also worship the deities. The deities are made of pure wisdom, those streams of intelligence. And as you go back in the sheaths, you'll find that there's a deity to each one of these sheaths, maybe even a host of deities. You probably are aware of Tibetan Buddhism and its advent here in the West, thanks indirectly to Mao Zedong, chasing the Tibets out of the lamas out of Tibet. Actually, he spread the bees of enlightenment all around the world, you see, unbeknownst to him, because I think he was the one that said religion is the opiate of the masses, or something like that. But actually what happened when he Red Chinese went into Tibet was not all horrible. It was actually the divine will that all of these great teachings, these tantric teachings, actually Vajrayana teachings that blend Tantra and Buddhism and yoga. It's a really beautiful hybrid. And so a lot of people are taking to the Tibetan Buddhist teachings now. I certainly did in my life and learned a lot from them. So that's the idea here, is to blend these kinds of paths, integrate them, synthesize them. Better yet, see them as one to begin with, and then you won't have to synthesize them. All religion is indigenous to your soul, right? There's no such thing as a foreign religion. This is all in me. And all these deities are within me, all my ancestors are within me, the gods and goddesses are within me, and guess what? God itself is within me. I am that. And that's Advaita Vedanta right there. This self is Brahman. Pragyanam Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. Tat Tvamasi. That you are. That thou art. You see. Or Ayam Atma Brahma. This self with its 5 sheaths is really actually Brahman when you just take away the 5 sheaths. Now you can take away the 5 sheaths by blowing your brains out for a second, you see, committing suicide, but actually that's a very inferior way of doing it. Actually the way you want to take away the 5 sheaths is to meditate them away. You do it perfectly tonight in deep sleep. You lose all attachment to form. Without a fear, without a doubt, you go straight to the light and you exist in this blissful condition called the Ananda Maya Kosha, the sheath of bliss. Let's translate that, sheath of bliss. This was the sheath of food, this was the sheath of subtle energy, this was the sheath of mind. We're at the sheath of intellect right now. And then there's the sheath of bliss. You see, Ananda Maya Kosha. That's the ego. That's that separate eye maker we were talking about. So the characteristics of those are all to be seen. Why? So that all doubt gets removed about your association with them. You can only associate with body, energy, mind, and intellect when you're master of them. To overcome fear means to master them. If you haven't mastered them, then you have fear of them somewhere in you. That's why people are afraid of the water. Some children are afraid of water, others aren't, because they have fear of water somewhere, because they drowned in a previous lifetime. And they never faced it off. I'd send my 2 Labradors, to the water. One would jump right in, fetch the coconut. The other would run away. You see, wouldn't go in the water. Took him most of his little doggy life, for the other dog to kind of nurse him into the water. So pretty soon they would both jump in. And then claws were flying. You couldn't get near them. You see, you'd swim with them. They'd scratch you, looking for an island. So there's a reason why this fear exists in us and these doubts. They say, says Lord Shiva, that doubt, ignorance, and fear make up the curtain of nescience, which falls down over your inner eye when you go into deep sleep. And what thickens that curtain of nescience? Brooding on fear, doubt, and ignorance. Nice teaching, huh? Om Namah Shivaya. This beautiful image is right here on our altar. He's the God of destruction. He's the God of dissolution. He's the God of wisdom. He's the God of formlessness. We go to Him in order to learn this conscious art of sloughing off forms, like a snake gets rid of its old skin. See? These are all different layers of skin. See? But you're this Kundalini snake that's coming up the spine. You see. So, if that's the curtain of nescience, then in order to raise it, or maybe thin it out, you see, give up my brooding first on all things that make me fear, that make me doubt, that make me ignorant. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some spiritual practice. 4 spiritual practices, basically. Meditation, which is the ultimate. I'm starting out with the topmost first and going down. Then study of scriptures and discussing them with your teacher and your sangha, going to class, this kind of things. Jnana Yoga, it's called. And then worship and devotion at the altar, offering flowers, incense, putting your head below your heart, prostrating before the deity, going to temples, churches, with sincere heart, surrendering yourself, your small self, to the great self. That's Bhakti Yoga. And then 4th, Karma Yoga, which is what everyone's in training for here in the West. They're all aspiring karmis, see. And probably you might as well include the whole world, because the West has taken over the whole world practically, and now everyone's running around like chickens with their heads cut off. I was just, before class today, in my house up in the mountain above the ashram, sitting and saying how wonderful it was to do nothing. Just to sit and to think about the higher teachings. That sound, precious live streaming audiences, our Hawaiian rain. Falling upon our ashram. So again, silence, there is deep introspection, peace of mind, very important for the human being. So these 4 practices, very important. Dhyan Yoga, meditation, Jnana Yoga, wisdom, Bhakti Yoga, devotion, Karma Yoga, selfless action. Now we found our way to the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Let's look at the characteristics of that. This is your intellectual sheath, or your intellectual body. It consists of the buddhi, the intelligent principle, the organs of feeling, and the sense of I am the doer. You might think that I am the doer maybe originates in the Anandamaya Kosha, but according to those who have inspected the Vijnanamaya Kosha, Vijnana means higher wisdom, is that sense of I do comes from that mechanism. I will conquer, I will move, I will learn, I will acquire. All comes out of that Vijnanamaya kosha. It reflects consciousness, but is a transformation of nature, prakriti. So it's a good reflector of consciousness, like the moon is a reflector of the sun's light. Vijnanamaya kosha reflects well the light of Brahman. This idea of reflection in degrees is very important. My teacher, Swami Sheshananda, used to say, light shines best off of a mirror that shines a little less well off of a lake, and then a little less off of a leaf, and very poorly off of a stone. So basically, you could be describing lots of things with that analogy. You could be describing the five sheaths. There's very little light off of the stone of the body, and a little more light shines through the prana, the leaf of the prana, and a little bit more light shines off of the lake of the mind, and more light shines off of this mirror of the intellect, especially if it's kept wiped clean. If the intellect is kept wiped clean by those four yogas every day, meditation, study, devotion, and action, selfless action, then the mirror of the mind stays clean, and your day goes fine. You see, I and my Father are one. Seek thee first the kingdom of heaven. Birds have nests, have foxes, and birds have nests, and birds and foxes have nests and holes, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head here. All of these sayings, teachings coming from whatever tradition or whatever scripture make sense to you, and they become precious to you. You hold them in the heart daily. So the intellect has that ability, but it also has that ability of becoming a dusty mind, so that you're not seeing and thinking right. We know that about the intellect. Einstein said that, for instance. One day, he's thinking of the highest theorems, you see, and another day, he forgets to tie his shoelaces and trips and breaks his arm. So the intellect is very astute and together one day, but very foolish another day. So the intellect has that sort of that rise and fall tendency like the prana does. So that's why you can't classify it as the ultimate reality. It retains its existence and interest via sense life. Oh, that's mine, sorry. It works, feels, and says, I am the doer, I am the seer, I engage in works, I enjoy their results. It holds within it the three states of consciousness, plus pleasure and pain. Well, there's another triputi, three states of consciousness: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. We have to start thinking about these as three states of our own consciousness, and we have three bodies that go with them. And our consciousness leaves the physical body, goes to our dream body, and then leaves that and goes to our deep sleep body. It's our business to try and become aware of what's happening when that goes on. That is, we have to take our intelligence with us. We have to hone our intelligence. We have to get our intelligent particle charged up, so we know what's happening to us in each moment of our existence, because each moment of our existence is one of our lifetimes. Who knows which lifetime is surfacing in any given minute of your day? Why you're feeling the way you are is because of that particular lifetime is coming to the fore of your consciousness at that time, whether it be a fear, a doubt, a victory, a pleasure, or some pain. So all of this is our makeup. This is our physical and astral and subtle and psychic makeup inside of us. And it's all existing in one eternal moment. It's not like it's coming, it seems like it's passing in phases, but it's all existing in one eternal moment, and inside of that one eternal moment, they're coming up and down, rising and falling, like waves in that ocean out there. Rising and falling on the lake of the mind, or on the ocean of the mind, but the ocean is not changing in its depths. So one beautiful song in India says, dive deep, O mind, dive deep into the ocean of God's beauty. If you descend to the uttermost depths, there you will find the gem of love. So that's the idea of this one unchanging Brahman and all things changing. Look at how many sets of 5 sheaths have risen and fallen in time immemorial. How many beings have been born since I started speaking 2 hours ago? And how many beings have died since I started speaking? Constant rising and falling. So there's this tempest in a teapot going on, see, all the time. But it's being held in these hands, these divine hands that are unchanging. The divine hands are called projection and withdrawal. And in between the projection and withdrawal is called sustenance. Lord Brahma is in charge of creating or projecting. Lord Vishnu, Krishna, is in charge of keeping it sustained. And Lord Shiva brings it to an end. Just like a kid building a sandcastle before the tide comes in. And the waters will destroy it. He has just as much fun watching it get destroyed as he did building it. So, as I've been saying lately, and I'll repeat it again, you can worship creation, Lord Brahma's work, and you can appreciate greatly Lord Vishnu's work, sustenance or preservation. But you have to make acquaintance with Lord Shiva, the god of destruction, the one who dissolves, the one in you who dissolves. Because Shiva is not outside somewhere. I don't know if any of you have seen him walking around. That God is within you. And that's why I started the class off by saying that when our ancestors are born, that's when they're the farthest away from us. When they're next to us, sitting. That's when they're farthest away from us. When they pass and their form dissolves back into us, that's when they're nearest to us. So we should start thinking differently about this idea of apparent separation. Is our upbringing, our conventional religions, even our science and our psychology in the West has not been giving us a very clear idea of the real essence of what's going on. We have to start thinking like yogis and yoginis, at least like spiritual aspirants, and become noble. And the more noble human beings we have in the world, the more nobility there will be amongst us. That is, if there are terrorist cells out there, then how about having some nice intelligence cells? The more the better gathering together. Each one of us is an intelligent cell, and inside of us are thousands and thousands, billions of other intelligent cells, not just in the form of actual intelligence, but in the form of our ancestors, gods and goddesses we worship. Why is worship one of the 4 yogas? Why is it one of the practices? Because when we worship the symbol, it's not idol worship. Conventional religion didn't peg that right. It's not idol worship. It's worshiping the foundation behind the symbol. So when Sri Ramakrishna, and that picture of him was taken, you see, he looked at it, probably didn't even know who it was because he didn't look in a mirror, and said, that shows a state of a soul in a very high state of samadhi. That picture will be worshipped by hundreds and thousands of people after I die. You imagine saying that about yourself when you were alive? Well, there are about 4 million, 5 million people worshipping Sri Ramakrishna. So it was a prophecy. He saw it as clear as a bell. But you never met a man who was so disidentified with his 5 sheaths. He practically wasn't here. You get that idea of an aura coming off a person that the apostles of Christ saw off of Jesus, and the Noble Eight saw coming off of Buddha, a light. Or the idea of almost walking on air, feet not quite touching the ground. That comes from this refined spiritual energy taken up the spine called ojas and tejas. It's intelligence in its manifestation. It's refined intelligence. It's come about over lifetimes, but at least in a few decades of a person living in the body and sort of condensing, and boiling, like you would boil milk to get it thicker and thicker, until you finally have this intense refinement of consciousness in you. And then anything you say or do or everything you touch and so forth. Everything you eat looks and tastes nothing like nothing else but Brahman. Your food seems to be intelligent. Yet, to an ordinary man looking on, it's just an insentient mass of matter. So that ability for the awakened intelligence to turn everything into Brahman is the final conclusion of the Upanishads. Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagad Sha means Brahman is one indivisible essence, homogeneous mass of pure conscious awareness. Time, space, living beings in the world are all in that. We're all Brahman. Akhandarupasthitir eva moksho. Living in constant recognition of that fact is called enlightenment. So there's a magazine out there called What is Enlightenment? I have the answer for them. You can quit printing the magazine. Enlightenment is living in constant recognition of the fact that all this is Brahman. So if you're identifying with the sheaths, you're never going to see that. You have to be bold. You have to crush the stars to atoms and unhinge the universe. Try it. You do it every night tonight in dreaming and deep sleep anyway. Might as well do it consciously. Try it in meditation. An hour or two of sitting still. If you cut down the mind's waves, yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, the vrittis, the vibrations, and you sit long enough in that stillness, you will see the light of Brahman. Nobody has the time for it today. Have you seen God? Well, I'm sorry, I don't have time. I don't have time to see my true nature, sorry. That's not high on my list today. You forget your true self and then you just engage yourself in the non-self, you see, and then you wonder why you're unhappy and sorrowful and afraid. It's no way to live. So it holds the three states of consciousness within it: waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Think about that. Those are your three states of consciousness, and you have three bodies that go with them. Those are yours. Take control of them. Take possession of them. No God will help you do that. No devil will keep you from it. Those are imaginations of the mind. It's all about you. This is a nice one. The Vijnanamaya Kosha is the upadi of the Atman. It is the sheath of the Atman. So it may look like it's not as refined and high as the Anandamaya Kosha, but many of the saints and seers give the buddhi, the intelligent factor, the highest reckoning for enlightenment. As if the ego can be a little bit not only unreliable, but also very transparent, very hard to put your finger on. You'll think you've gotten your ego under control, and you start to go into your first, highest formless meditation, and that's when the ego will insinuate itself on you and spoil everything. But it's this intelligence, you see, that takes the ego around all the worlds. It's the chariot in which the mind complex rides in. Intelligence, that's why I'm teaching the intelligent particle. It's a projecting power, it's a withdrawing power, it's an all-pervasive power. It may be the first thing out the gate, you see, in the whole creative process. First thing out the gate would be intelligence. That is, if you were to see the word out of which everything comes via vibration, that light that was carrying the potential for everything in it would be intelligence. So when people say, I've seen the light, they've really seen the ocean of intelligence. Living intelligence. And by the time it gets down here, it solidifies into a microphone, into an instrument, into a body. This is just solidified intelligence now. Into your food. And that's why all is Brahman. and the Word is everywhere. It was with God and it was God, both. And John said, I don't understand what you're saying, Lord. And Christ said, you better go to Gethsemane and meditate then, because if you don't understand this projecting process and the withdrawing process, then you're only half a realized soul. Basically, some of the teachers, and I don't necessarily agree with them, but some of them are saying the difference between the Mahayana path and the Hinayana path is that Mahayana path has compassion, bodhicitta, and the Hinayana path never did. It was all about a few hundred souls getting enlightenment, and they had to be monks or arhats. But when the whole thing widened out, left India, and went to Tibet and Japan and China and Korea and Ceylon, and the most amazing spread of religion ever recorded in human history was Buddhism. And it did it without lifting a finger. What to speak of a sword or an army? So when it spread all around the world, you see, it was this Buddha nature, it was Bodhi, it was intelligence that did it. So the sage and seers give it the highest, first compound of Atman, Vivekananda called it, first compound. And he said, if you believe the will is the first compound, then you're just, playing into the hands of the Darwinists. You're playing in the hands of the Darwinists if you think that will has done it. For survival of the fittest and all that. It's intelligence that came first. Basically, there's this poster out now that's very disturbing about Einstein. And it has this quote that he never said on it. It said, imagination is more powerful than intelligence. And so I really objected to that when I saw it. And somebody then told me, he didn't really say that. Somebody made that up. And it's got him, sticking his tongue out, like making a face. Like, this great genius, I'm just one of you. Just like the rest of you. So somebody had this not so brainy idea of putting words in his mouth, you see. Intelligence can't even be compared to imagination. Imagination is what you're getting out there with these silly movies that they're spending billions of dollars on to entertain superficial minds in theaters and get their money. When people are starving in the streets and human beings who are God walking around in human form are left untended. That's not humanity, that's not sanity. Intelligence, waking the intelligent particle up, that will do the trick. And that makes you into an enlightened soul. That's the purpose of human existence, is to realize God. You can use any word you want there. Reality, Brahman, Allah, doesn't matter. You just better know the meaning of the word and say it in the right circle of people. I can say anything here because this is Ramakrishna's loka. This is universalism. We accept all religions here. Religion is indigenous to your soul. There's no such thing as a foreign religion. Thank you. Now, the final thing about the sheath of intelligence is that it uses mind and intellect for its appearance. So there must be a difference between intellect and intelligence. Intellect is a sheath. The sheath of a professor or the sheath of a genius, you see, they've all collected a bit of intelligence there. And therefore, the sheath itself is the holder of that intelligence. So there's a difference between the sheath and that which it holds, the essence and the container. So a good distinction to make there. Now, in the remaining time, let's make sure we finish this chart, which is, again, remember, returning just to this basic quote that we started out with 5 weeks ago about the 5 sheaths, one being inside the other, and all of them being inside of Brahman. Each one pervades the next. That is, the Anandamaya Kosha will pervade the Vijnanamaya kosha, and these two will pervade the Manomaya kosha, and then these three will pervade the Pranamaya kosha, and these four will pervade the Annamaya kosha. And so basically, when each one is transcended and given up, you're going closer and closer back to the essence, which is not a sheath at all, which is not a covering at all, which is not an upadi, which is not a kosha, which is not a vehicle. In fact, sometimes they call it ativahana, the original vehicle. That is that which carries everything. Vahana would be something that helps you, like Vishnu rides the Garuda, you see. It would be his vahana. So this original carrier of everything, you see, is consciousness. And it pervades everything else, but none of that can pervade it. It is the all-pervading presence and power. But by that time we would call it Shakti, or Mahashakti, or Mahamaya, or Divine Mother. Now let's look at the Anandamaya Kosha's attributes, and then we can bring this series of classes to our close. It is a reflection of bliss, but is reflected in the tamas of Maya. This is a good teaching, a little bit esoteric, but basically to simplify it is that when you see that, feel that bliss inside of yourself, which is my bliss, that's not the supreme bliss. That's your own little store of bliss. Just like you have your own little store of intelligence, you also have your own little store of bliss. And the way I've thought of to describe this is if a man or a soul was meditating inside and was very close to hearing, was actually hearing the sound of Om, and was following that sound inward, or seeing the light of Brahman and following that light toward the ocean of Brahman, then there would come a time when it would arrive at that sheath of bliss, and it would sit there and it would say, I've attained the ultimate. And so many souls have done that and then fallen away and never seen or immersed themselves in Brahman. Shankara says in his Vivekachudamani, beautifully, he says, that nectar-like swell, that ocean of Brahman, replete with the nectar-like swell of the Atman, into which my mind fell like a hailstone and merged there forever. See? That's how he describes this beautiful dissolution process of the human soul, like a hailstone, dissolving the solidified five sheaths that it took on back to its original state. And what I'm saying here is you're doing this in deep sleep, but nescience is still there. Cloud of unknowing is still there. You wake up a fool because you went into deep sleep as a fool. But an illumined soul will go into not only dreaming in deep sleep, but meditation in full consciousness. See the self, see the light, hear the sound, and wake up thinking, I haven't gone anywhere. There is no movement in Brahman. There is no coming and going. And that's what Vivekananda said. He said, coming and going is all nonsense. The soul, where is the time in which the soul would come? And where is the space to which it would come and go? When you've seen through time and space, then there's no time to come and go, and there's no space to go to or to come from. You're in one solid place. This is the mudra for it. Shiva mudra. Steady, stationary, static, unmoving. And that's the way the soul feels when it puts away all of this play, all of this sport, all of this dreaming, or if it's just not that innocent, all of this suffering. Because a lot of souls have come here to dream, some have come to play, some have come to sport, and some have come to suffer. And probably it's not even so simple as that. There's an admixture of all of those going on in all souls. Some are even suffering on account of others, or for the benefit of others, to take their karmas. So this is some reflection about this idea of the light of your ego. If you are there in your ego, the great soul would all of a sudden somehow make a turn away from his own ego, and he'd look in the distance and he would see the son of Brahman when he was sitting on the moon of ego, enjoying his own little reflected light. But he wouldn't know it was reflected light, he would think it's his own. This is called my bliss. So if a New Ager comes to me and says, I follow my bliss, I usually say to him, that's too bad. What you want to do is follow the bliss of Brahman. That's called Ananda. That word isn't big in Sanskrit for no reason. There's no opposite to Ananda. It's not like, joy and sorrow or happiness and misery. Ananda is it. That's why thousands of souls, their last name is Ananda. Have you noticed? You could walk into a room of swamis and say, with a telegram and say, would Mr. Ananda please stand up? You wouldn't know who to give the telegram to. They're all named Ananda. So they've reached that bliss, which is the peace that passes all understanding. There's nothing beyond that. It's Satchitananda. It's the highest existence, it's the highest wisdom, and it's the highest bliss. Sat Chit Ananda. Another nice Triputi to meditate on. It's like they couldn't make up their mind what to call Brahman once they saw it. Let's call it pure existence, Sat. That was one school. Another school looked at it and said, oh, it seems to me like pure intelligence. Let's call it Chit. And another school comes and says, we think it's pure bliss. We like to dance and sing in it. We're going to call it Ananda. But it's 3 in 1, see. Satchitananda. It's one of the most precious names for reality in any language. And if you put Akanda in front of it, then you've got an even more precious name. Akanda Satchitananda. And this bliss is named after it. That is, this sheath is named after it. So it's not your own, it is your own little bliss, but there is something beyond it. It appears and is felt only in favorable conditions and circumstances. Aha. I don't feel my bliss all the time, do I? It's only when it comes forward and gives me a good day, like have a nice day with a smile, you see. But we should replace the have a nice day and a smile with the Shvara. The Shvara means, you've seen the Om sign, right? This is waking. This is dreaming. And this is deep sleep, see? And here's the Shvara off somewhere in Turyatita. In fact, it's a little one-eyed smile, that's how I call it. It's a little half moon laying on its back with a little dot above it. Shvara. That's not just have a nice day, that's all my days are Brahman. All my nights are Brahman. It's beyond nice. And it's beyond real nice, too. So there's a clue. This Anandamaya Kosha is felt only in favorable conditions. It also has a cause because it requires good actions to be operative. It is not to be mistaken for the Atman, as it is dependent on something else. It is experienced in deep sleep, glimpsed in waking and dreaming, but only upon the fulfillment of desires. So they've analyzed this ego in a philosophical way to the nth degree and come up with these observances. It also remains with the body under the control of the gunas, that is, rajas, tamas, and sattva, as we just talked about. Restlessness, slothfulness, and balance, always going through that state. So it takes on the coloration of other things, circumstances, modes of nature. It changes with them. It's a chameleon. And that's why I say it's very difficult to transcend. First you have to find it. Sort of like trying to find the center of an onion. And as you do, you're crying a lot. So, therefore the seers rely quite a bit more on the intelligent particle. First thing out the door, the first compound of consciousness is intelligence. Use your intelligence. That was evidently the mantra my father wanted to bestow upon all his kids. That's what I always saying to us. Use your intelligence. But he didn't know anything about these teachings. Well, here's something you might have asked yourself. Oh, sorry. That is, that this student, when he hears this teaching from his guru, Shankara, says, "Pupil, I do not understand. You ask me to do away with these 5 sheaths, and when I do, then I see nothing but the void. What is to be known there?" The teacher answers, "If you can do away with these 5 sheaths through the instructions of the scriptures, what remains? The witness, consciousness, the Atman, thine own self." So that is knowing the truth, and the truth sets you free. It's just that when you first walk in a room out of a sunlit day and it's completely dark and you can't see anything, but if you remain a few minutes standing and looking, pretty soon your eyes acclimatize to the darkness, right? And you begin to see little shapes here and there, and you can move about the room. This is what you have to do in meditation. You attain the transcendence of the 5 sheaths, and you hit a place of void, rather emptiness. And then you think, like the cartoon, you see one Buddhist monk turns to the next Zen Buddhist monk and says, "Is this all there is? We just sit here for 8 hours a day?" No, what there is by concentrating on that emptiness, then fullness begins to appear. Everything that's in you, the subtle forms, the causal forms, your lifetimes, which we were talking about at the beginning, all of that begins to suggest itself to you out of the Akashic record. And even beyond Akashic records, that is, beyond levels of space, the different Akashas, which these represent too, that is, a Bhutakasha, the Pranakasha, the Chittakasha, the Jnanakasha, and the Chiddakasha, or roughly speaking. Basically, these are all levels of space too. They're not just sheaths. It's not just your individual sheath we're talking about here. It's the sheath of all human beings. It's also the sheaths of all the ancestors and the celestials. So it's not just at an individual level, it's also at a collective and a cosmic level. That's another Triputi. That is, there's the human beings as a group, and then there's the ancestors as a group, and there's the celestials as a group, and they all fit into different levels of consciousness. Basically, summate them down to these various levels of space. So, space, the beings in space, and the intelligence that has formed these levels of space are all to be considered in this quotient, and at 3 levels of consideration. Now, if you go beyond those 3 levels of consideration, you have arrived. See? And that's why he says, it is consciousness itself, it's the observer, it's the Atman, it is thine own self that has projected all this. And you participated in it willingly. Now withdraw from it willingly, like Lord Buddha did. And prove to yourself that you're not matter. You prove to yourself that you're not matter by leaving matter alone, not by identifying more and more with it. Otherwise, you're only one sheath, aren't you? You're only one body. You don't know what food is. You don't know the energy in food. You can't even eat healthy food and good health, you see. So your whole society, your whole life, and your series of life becomes being born with beings who are tamasic and rajasic. Sri Krishna says in the Gita, some beings who worship the Bhutas, they go to the Bhutas. Bhutas means physical beings. The beings who worship the Pitris, they go to the Pitris. Pitris means ancestors. The beings that worship the sages and seers, the deities, they go to the sages and seers and the deities. But my devotees come to me, he says. Those who worship me come to me, the archetypical soul, the supreme being, the supreme form. They will come to me. So what the mind contemplates on, that it gravitates to. So therefore, charge up the chitta, raise the mind by degrees. Now, I think that, there is one more quote at the bottom of this. Shankara says, being enveloped by the 5 sheaths, the Atman does not manifest. If these sheaths are taken away, the Atman manifests, pure eternal bliss, unchangeable, direct, and self-luminous. Svayam Jyoti. The Atman is self-luminous. It shines by its own light. It doesn't borrow light from anywhere else. That's how you'll know it. And if you are in any of these other lesser lights and distant glares here, then you'll know it's not the Atman. So the seers of India are very specific about what is truth and what isn't, what is reality and what isn't. And before they make that statement, all of this is Brahman, they have looked through all of with their discriminating power of the intellect, they have looked through all of those things so that when they say all of this is Brahman, they follow it up by saying, but Brahman can never be objectified. It can never be turned into a form. So what you're seeing here in all these forms is Atman in its manifestation. But if you're taking the form to be the truth, then you won't see the Atman. That's what he's saying here. So, case in point, why none of us see God in each other. In our relationships, when we marry, Shiva doesn't see Shakti, Shakti doesn't see Shiva. They don't worship each other, do they? They fight with each other. Or it's a matter of convenience. Or I'm waiting for my soulmate. Whatever excuse is there. But to see God in everything, that's a far cry beyond mere philosophy. It's a matter of direct spiritual experience. And here's the experimental ground right here, you see. I mean, we can say everything about the Annamaya Kosha, that it's formed of food and, it's filled with filthy things and basically it's born and it dies and so forth. But basically that's the experimental station for you right now. That's the Karma Yoga station. I mean, each of these sheaths could be really very much correlated with the 4 yogas. So everything that I have said today about the 5 sheaths is coming out of what I know. And what I know is coming out of what my teachers told me and what the scriptures reveal. And the direct spiritual experience of the seers who wrote the scriptures. And India, in her perennial wisdom, is the mother of all religions. They don't call her the mother of all religions for nothing. It's instanced by the fact that there's not one prophet there. There's not one holy book. There are hundreds and dozens of each throughout time immemorial, stretching back towards a time when we can't even record. I mean, if we sing something like Shri Ramachandra Kripalu Rajamana Harina Bhavabhaya Dharuna Shri Ramachandra Shri Ramachandra Shri Ramachandra Shri Ram. Probably can't find an avatar, a divine being as ancient as Ramchandra. Even before Krishna was Ram. So it's not just the amount of memory you have in your motherboard. See that word. Understand it in its most ancient implications. This is the demonstration of eternity. And not a moment has passed, because the minute I chant Ram, Ram is here present with us. Ram is all pervasive. Ram has been there since before Vivekananda came to the West, which is the reason all of us are sitting here now, is because Vivekananda came to the West. So there are many, many causes to these effects we see all around us. It's our business sort of as a Sherlock Holmes of the Maya you see, out there, of the samsara, to look into them, to trace them to their origins. It's a beautiful word in Sanskrit, utpatti, means origin. Their whole spiritual life is based around tracing things back to their origin. And lo and behold, when they traced everything back to its origin, when they traced fire to its origin, and they found that the suns in the sky were really suns in the internal sky, and the kundalini, the Ida and the Pingala nerves were sun and moon, and it all represented some inner universe and cosmos full of suns and stars and moons. Then they found out that that was all tracing them back to another origin that was even deeper and deeper. So finding the origins of all things, finally they came to the final conclusion called a parinama. Parinama means non-transformation. And ajativada means the path of those who know that there's no birth, no death. In other words, everything is free of origins. You trace origins to find out that everything has no origin. It's originless. There's no beginning, middle, and end to anything. Understanding that gives you a little trepidation about being caught in cycles. Because this idea that there are origins to things is what's powering and fueling our world, isn't it? Tomorrow will be a better day. So I ended one day and I'm beginning another day. My next lifetime might be more free of karma. See, so I'm already living in my next lifetime, or I'm looking into the past and brooding on the past. It's all based in cycles of time. Going to work is based in cycles of time. So I'm imagining that there's beginnings, middles, and ends to everything. But I haven't seen the beginning, middleless, endless Brahman upon which all of this movement is taking place. A dancer needs a stage. So there is a substratum, a foundation called consciousness for all of this movement. This apparent movement, because possibly speaking, probably speaking, that's another conclusion, that Brahman doesn't move, you see. If Brahman doesn't move, then probably I shouldn't move for a while and see how that feels. If I want to know God, if I want to see God, I should see how God sees. That was how one Christian mystic put it, Meister Eckhart. If you want to see God, you should see how God sees. So how does God see? Out of a single eye, if he sees at all. And when he closes that, what happens? So I should probably assume the position. Zen Buddhists tell me if I sit on a zafu, which is what I'm sitting on right now, and I sit there for 8 hours, then I will die. And so the Zen Roshi will ask you after your practice, did you die on your zafu? That's the whole purpose to Zazen. To die on your zafu. We're probably just going to go beyond the 5 sheaths, and this final sheath of the Anandamaya Kosha, your little bliss that you're attached to, your clinging to life that you're attached to, you will give that up and merge yourself like a hailstone into the formless Brahman. So we made a full cycle in this teaching on the Advaita Vedanta. It's very interesting because the 5 sheaths rather are Vedanta 101 teaching. Well, this is the first thing you'll learn. This and the teaching of Vivarta, that everything here is a false superimposition over Brahman. It's all a veil, it's all a mask. And it's your business to tear those masks and veils away and see the truth. Live in the truth. So that's all Vedanta 101. So basically it's a finishing school for souls. When they come to Vedanta, which has always been described as an underground river, nourishing everything on the surface, informing all religions, but not a religion itself, then beings are getting this finishing school of wisdom, level of teaching. The wisdom traditions, we're interested in them because basically we've been raised in faith traditions. So now we're beginning to go toward the wisdom traditions of the East, Taoism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, and so forth. Because there we're getting answers for our questions that we're not getting here. You see, the idea of faith and wisdom has to be merged. If it's just love and devotion, it tends to get sentimental, because it doesn't have wisdom to check it. And if it's just wisdom, it tends to get dry and intellectual, because it doesn't have love to moisten it, you see. So my teacher used to say, Vedanta is the two wings of the bird. You get wisdom and you get devotion fused into one, because the bird's not going anywhere with one wing. The bird is this soul that wants to leave these heavier climates and go soaring. And you could pretty much be making a same case for this idea of wisdom principles and deities. Deities get the devotion, and wisdom principles get the study, the attention. And so when you bring those two together, you've got a well-rounded spiritual life. There's nothing to learn after that. You see, there was this one great questioner. Well, there were thousands in India, but one especially great questioner that came among the rishis who were seated. What did you like to know? What's your question? And so the devotee said, teach me that one thing by which knowing all else is known. And all the rishis bowed their heads. That's the best question we ever heard. Teach me that one thing by which knowing all else is known. Because so many questioners like Narada and other great beings had come to the rishis, and what they had said was, you know, I've studied all the scriptures, I've meditated, I've done my devotions at the altar, I've tried to free myself of karmas via pure action, but I'm still missing something. I can't put my finger on what it is that I'm missing. And so then the seers have to play with them a little, you see. Send them to this teacher and that teacher to try and get that little bit of information they're missing. But this questioner was cutting to the chase. You see. Just teach me that one thing. That one thing is Atman, never free, never bound. That's the knowledge of the true self within. One hates to use the word self in accordance with it, but nevertheless, pure conscious awareness, timeless, deathless consciousness, Chaitanya, Brahman, Atman, Mukti, Moksha, Kaivalya, Nirvana, Satori, Samadhi. There are words you can borrow from the different darshanas of India and different traditions too, like Fana in Islam, that peg it as far as it can be pegged, that is pointed out to you so you know that there is an ultimate supreme goal to go to. Basically you say, what's my goal in this life? And then someone else says to you, the teacher says you shouldn't have any goals, you shouldn't be goal-oriented. But then you say, no, I'm talking about the supreme goal. That's different, you see. There is a supreme goal in which all beings lean towards. They gravitate towards that. And that gets back to our intelligent cell. It's in our very memory. It's in the deepest part of our memory we retain that. We feel it when we're children. I was saying last week that I had memory of it in the crib. When you meditate on your alambanas, that is, start with earth, then meditate on fire or water, then meditate on fire, and meditate on air, meditate on ether, and then meditate on smelling, then meditate on tasting, touching, feeling, hearing. You meditate on each of these as a part of my being. This is a way of connecting into yourself. You actually sit there and take minutes, maybe hours, to meditate on these. And then when you've passed through them all, you start meditating on your different states of awareness, your waking state, your dreaming state, your deep sleep state. Anyway, somewhere along the way you meditate on your early life, when you were a baby. You try and remember what you experienced as an infant. Even prenatal, if you can, what it was like to be in the womb. And you'll find out that there is smriti bedu, there is cosmic memory of these things stored back in your mind, because there are things you've experienced, and all things you've experienced are stored back in the mind. Maybe not so much the individual mind, but definitely the collective mind, and very definitely the cosmic mind. It's all there. So if you can connect to the collective humanity and what it is going on there, and you could also connect to the cosmic mind of God through the study of cosmic principles, then you'll start to remember. These memories will start coming forward. And this is time well spent, because you're tracing origins back to this supreme origin, toward this originless being, which you are. At that point, talking about a hailstone merging in the ocean would be superfluous, because the whole idea of water solidifying into and separating itself from the ocean is silly. See, it was really a dream that happened to me. Like people are saying nowadays, oh, you were a paramecium, and, pretty soon you were a salamander or something, crawled out on the banks and sprouted legs, lost your tail. Then you were a monkey. My teacher used to laugh at that. Whenever my teacher laughed, you'd laugh with him because he was infectious. He would say, oh, you see, the scientists are trying to convince us that in order to see our relatives, we have to go to the zoo. He would laugh. Say, but what about my ancestors? Are they monkeys? Well, at least I hope they're not. And then what about the gods and goddesses and these other levels of consciousness? What about Christ saying, birds have nests and foxes have holes, but you have no place to lay your head here? Is he calling you an insect or a bird or an animal? Or is he saying mankind is cut in the image of God? We're not animals. We never were. Consciousness has the power to dream animals, and they are our projections, just like everything else, right? So we have dreamed every animal form out there. I mean, you don't have to go to outer space to find UFOs. All of this is a UFO. Octopuses in the ocean are strange creatures in another world, as far as you're concerned. Everything has come out of the human mind. The human mind is the author of everything. And that's because it is one with the Father. It's because it's infused with intelligence. And intelligence is a sentient, eternally living verity. So with those words, as inadequate as they are to really explain the topic, I leave you at the end of this series of Advaita Vedanta classes. And please feel free to join in our other classes coming up in San Francisco and Portland, which will be live streamed on Sundays. And we will meet here in this location again, probably in about a month, 5 weeks.
Tuesday.
And then, of course, on Tuesday, this doesn't, well, it does actually involve the live streaming audience. There's a Tuesday night satsang and arati right here at this altar that you can come and join us if you like. That's at 6 o'clock.
6:30 for live stream.
And 6:30 for live stream, because the satsang will begin then. So send in your questions, and I will try and answer them as best as possible. In the meantime, may this stream of intelligent particles overflow, infuse us, wrap us in its warm, sweet embrace, and the embrace of enlightenment, which is full of existence, knowledge, bliss. And may we all then, through those stream of intelligent particles, reach the goal of human existence. So let's end here with a quick chant. Om Sato, Om Sato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamaya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya Abira Bira Mayedi Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Denamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.